You can switch off your camera. We are now back to the...
So good morning again, good afternoon and good evening for those that are on the other side of the planet. And I would like to welcome you all to this special event celebrating the Third World Statistics Day. This is celebrated every 5 years. In fact, the event was created by the United Nations Statistical Commission in 2010. They normally celebrated the event on October 20th, but some countries do celebrate on a different date. So we thought that it was opportune, given the thematic of the Statistical Forum, to have this special event. The topic of today is science and art of making number talks. As you all know, statistics touch all aspects of our life, keep track of people, jobs, measuring how much people earn, how the economy is performing, how the health is also doing. And for that, statistician has the task to meticulously collect, transform raw data into information for all of us, for citizen, analysts, economists, journalists, policymakers, so that they can have the information to make good decision process. But beside transforming data into knowledge, we need to tell stories that are digestible to everyone, not only specialists. And we also know that people may also misuse statistics, either out of honest confusion, ignorance, or out of a desire to support their argument without worrying about the statistical rigor. Meanwhile, we've been hit by a deadly pandemic that has created violent shock to our society in the worst economic crisis century. It has also affected, as we saw in the last 2 days, the capacity of statisticians to collect and produce statistics in a traditional way in a time where we need more information to make good evidence-based decisions. At the same time, we know that the digital revolution has generated new sources of data, such as big data. It has improved the access to the existing data. Yesterday, a presenter told us that there's a lot of data that are sitting there that is not shared. So we're all facing opportunities and challenges. Overcoming them to promote the value and the power of sound use of statistics will be the focus of today's discussion. To help me with this task, I have a fabulous panel of remarkable individuals, and let me spend a few minutes to present them to you. First, we have Ola Awad, who's president of the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics. She has been president since 2009, leading the successful development and implementation of various statistical and non-statistical programs on the local and regional international level. Dr. Awad is the first woman elected from developing countries and the Arab region to lead the International Association of Official Statistics. She is currently the co-chair of the high-level group for partnership, coordination, and capacity building for statistics for the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development. And she's also council member of the International Statistics Institute. She holds a doctoral degree in business administration from the University of Liverpool, in the UK, and an MSc in applied statistics from Birzeit University, and a master's degree in business administration and management from Boston University, as well as a bachelor degree in economics from Birzeit University. Ola, welcome. We have also Rashad Kassim, who's deputy governor of the South African Reserve Bank. He served as a member of the Monetary Policy Committee as well as the Financial Stability Committee. Before, he was head of the Economic Research Statistics Department and responsible for producing macroeconomic statistics, research, analysis, and forecasts. And he also served as the Deputy Director General responsible for producing the country economic statistics at Statistics South Africa. He was also before professor and head of the School of Economic and Business Science at the University of Witwatersrand. Welcome, welcome, Rashad. We also have Henry Kerr, who is the economic editor at The Economist at The Economist, principal leader writer on economics and overseas economic coverage through the newspaper. He covers story on fiscal and monetary policy, labor market, trade, central bank, competition policy, the future of business cycle, globalization, taxation, trade, housing market, and also COVID-19 pandemic. In 2018, Henry became the youngest economics editor in the newspaper history. He also works on inequality, was shortlisted for the Society of Professional Economists Rubinsky Prizes for Economic Writing, and he's highly commended in the Journalist of the Year category at the Wincott Award for Business, Economic, and Financial Journalism. He has a MPhil, with distinction in economics, and a BA from the University of Oxford, where he was a John Hicks Foundation Prize winner. Welcome, Henry. We have also Susanna Cordero, who is the president of the Instituto Brasileiro of Geography and Statistica. We already had her CV. She leads the Brazilian National Statistics Agency, and before that, in fact, she is the youngest person to ever hold the role of president of the IBGE, and the second woman to do so. Before assuming her role, she served as an economist at the World Bank. She held a PhD in political science from the MIT, a master in public administration and international development from Harvard Kennedy School, and a graduate magna cum laude at the social study from Harvard College. Welcome again, Susanna. We also have Tim Harford. Tim is an economist, a journalist, and a broadcaster. He's author of How to Make the World Adds Up, The Data Detective, Messi, and The Million Seller Undercover Economist. Tim is a senior columnist at the Financial Times. He's a presenter at Radio 4 More and Less, and the I2 Topping series 50 Things That Made the Modern World. He's an associated member of the Nuffield College, Oxford, an honorary fellow of the Royal Statistics Society. Tim has been made Order of the British Empire for services to improve economic understanding in the New Year's honor of 2019. Welcome, Tim. So, as you can see, we have a great panel of experts. We have people from statistical agencies, central bank, journalists, user of data, and it should be quite an interesting conversation. My first question to all of you: what are the key lessons that we can draw from the pandemic for the production and use of statistics? And I will start with Ola.
Thank you so much. I'm really very much happy and honored to be with you and to join such an important session. As for this question, I'm very much happy as a chief statistician that our role as NSOs was more recognized when we had such kind of crisis. So it's very much important that there was really much more recognition on the role of NSOs in the COVID-19 pandemic and how much important and vital our role is, how much important reliable data in such crisis is really important. From our perspective as NSOs, it was really a good, important lesson for us and a very strong one. The new innovative way of data collection was also an added value in our nature of work. Especially we often use the traditional way of data collection, and there was still no any kind of courage to start and to have really more innovative way of data collection. And this has, I mean, brought another era of our nature of work. One more thing I would like also to add, the most important thing I may mention is communication, and how communication was very much important from our side with all of our stakeholders and players, whether from the government, private sector, civil organization, and actually partnering. We have to make sure, and we have all to to be convinced that no one can work alone, and no one, whatever effort you can do, you can achieve anything without having such a real partnership with everyone. So partnership communication was really very important. I may say now we are coming as NSOs from this crisis to a new era of the role of NSOs, a new era of the modernization of statistics. And this is really vital from our side. And as much as the importance of data production, it was very much important of the data, of the IT infrastructure in the NSOs, which it has to be very much comply with what we are developing and progressing in data in data production. So this is what I may add to this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Rashad, from the central bank, how does it look like?
Thank you, Louis Mark. Well, I guess I could look at it from two lenses. The one is I can look at it from the monetary policy process committee, where the demands are kind of stronger and balanced in terms of real economy statistics. So I could look at it from the lens of the Financial Stability Committee, where the demands are disproportionately greater in terms of the monetary and the financial sector. Now, it has been fashionable to compare the COVID-19 with the great financial crisis. And I think that's a good comparison. The thing that strikes me about the difference between the two is that in the context of the global financial crisis, there were large questions about how well are we measuring the financial sector. Do we have good balance sheet data? Is the flow of funds adequate? Do we have good positions? Is our kind of structure of the banking sector and the locational banking sector statistics adequate? So there was a profound self-reflection about whether the financial statistics lived up to the task of detecting financial stress. I don't think the problem was the statistics. The problem was really the way in which policymakers may or may not have read what's going on. But I think that in the COVID-19 process, it was a very different story. It put the entire statistical system under stress. It is not about measurement of the financial sector. It was about how do you collect statistics when the core of your statistical system of massive shocks in the economy, and I think that's really was the key thing. Suddenly, at the best of times, data is crude. Any number you get is crude. Their margins of errors, their response rates are not where they should be. There's non-sampling response. But I think what this did, it accentuated that, and it kind of raised some fundamental questions about how is it that you interpret data when in fact you're really dealing with unprecedented biases and errors, because firms, statistical agencies are not able to collect data. And I think that in a normal way, what do you do with preliminary data where your response rates are kind of rather low and don't meet standards? So I think that overall, the real issue is, if you have an economy that or a country that has a agile, technological intensive infrastructure, the damage, the mitigation was taken care of through more effective systems. If you had a statistical infrastructure that relied on classic face-to-face, going out and so on, then suddenly you realize that actually you're in a bit of a kind of a statistical vacuum. And what that did, it made policy making a real dilemma. You're dealing with numbers that are uncertain. How do you determine, monetary policy and financial stability? But I guess I would say more as you come to a few questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. I'll move on to Susanna, who already gave us a very nice presentation in the previous session, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more on some of the lessons learned that you have in Brazil.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. I just wanted to complement what Ola and Rashad have said and emphasize one point, which is the ability to respond quickly. I think this was the most difficult lesson to learn in this compressed period of time, where to respond quickly, the organization had to adapt very rapidly. And that involved primarily a short feedback loop between high-level management and frontline data collectors. We needed to, in real time, adjust the system with very small teams, with targeted mandates to respond in an agile manner to the significant challenge that confronted our NSO.
So now that we have heard from three producers of statistics, let's hear what is the view of our user. Let's start with Henry.
Sure, thank you for having me on this panel today. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I think we've seen several things come through strongly this year in terms of the public consumption of statistics. One is that people really struggle to deal with exponential growth as a concept, and this relates to what Susanna was just saying. The speed at which policymakers have had to move this year has been because of that exponential growth in the pandemic. We already knew that people struggle with this as a concept, and I don't think you're getting around that fact. It's even true of politicians who have often been too slow moving, I would say. But what that does mean is that because of the nature of the crisis, its explosive nature, the premium on having up-to-date statistics is very high so that you can tell what's going on. But that sort of rush to have sort of daily updates or on deaths and on cases has introduced a bit of confusion too. You know, the big difficulty this year has been everyone's wanted up-to-the-minute, up-to-date information on what's going on with infection cases, and neither instance have the statistics been all that reliable on infections because testing rates have varied a lot, on deaths because there are lags, and because you really should be looking at excess deaths and not just what's monitored. So I think what's come to the fore in my mind is perhaps the need to get this balance right between being up to date and fast moving and ensuring that the quality of communication is good. And sometimes that balance has been struck, and sometimes it hasn't. And the other thing I'd say is that it's really become clear how there's enormous value added just from clear aggregation and presentation of statistics. So I was talking to our data team about this earlier, and we've relied a lot on the Johns Hopkins effort to compile just a base level of data for what's going on globally. And really, it's hard to overstate the extent to which that makes your life easier as a journalist if data is aggregated rigorously and centrally and then presented well.
Thank you, Henry. Tim, did you get the right information to do your job?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, I thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this panel. I was wondering whether I would have anything to add, because I agree with almost everything that's been said, but I think I do have a couple of points I might want to outline. I mean, we lost Ennio Morricone this year, and he was, of course, the composer of the music to the great spaghetti western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So let me think about the good, the bad, and the ugly, about statistics and statistical provision during the pandemic. Or maybe I should say the good, the missing, and the ugly, because it's been very interesting to see what hasn't been there. Let me start with the ugly. We had a almost amusing situation here in the UK. Towards the end of September, the second wave seemed to be coming. There was a sharp uptick in cases. We were thinking to ourselves, goodness me, we're back in March. The lockdowns are on their way. And then the data seemed to turn. Suddenly they flattened off. Maybe just quite gentle hygiene measures, washing your hands, maintaining a bit of space. Maybe that was doing the trick after all. And there was this moment of hope for about a week. And then the Public Health England announced that it had actually lost about 16,000 cases because it had been using an outdated Excel spreadsheet format, and they'd run out of rows. So all the cases had disappeared because they just couldn't fit on the spreadsheet. So I say almost funny because this is clearly a catastrophic failure of data collection and data processing. They're using the wrong tool. I mean, I'm no expert in this kind of thing, but I understand spreadsheets, not really ideal for managing many hundreds of thousands of different entries. You want a proper database. Running out of rows is just one of so many different things that could go wrong. So that was embarrassing. And I think it was indicative of the scramble of agencies that weren't necessarily used to dealing with statistics, weren't used to the level of scrutiny, were functioning under a tremendous amount of stress, trying to get everything done in a hurry and patch something together. And then once they'd patched something together, they didn't come back and replace it with something more robust. So that was ugly, really ugly. And I'm sure that is not the only case around the world of that sort of thing happening. More interesting in a way is what's missing. What the pandemic has highlighted, for example, is that we don't, in the UK, and I think in most places, we don't have a survey of population biometrics, if you like. So now the Office for National Statistics has done, I think, a terrific job of going out and trying to get a representative sample of people and go back again and again to test for COVID infections. So we have a real sense of how many infections the test and trace system is missing. We know how many infections are out there. But it raises the question, shouldn't we have this all the time? And shouldn't they be testing for diabetes, for markers of hypertension, for HIV, for gonorrhea, measles? I mean, all kinds of things they could be testing for. It might be very expensive to have such a panel, but you start to wonder whether it's worth it. And the other thing that we found has been missing, and other members of the panel have alluded to, is really good use of administrative data or other indicators to provide very rapid measures of what the economy is doing. And people have been talking about doing this for a long time, but yet when the economy suddenly changed very dramatically, we found we didn't really have the rapid economic data that we might have wanted. But let me finish my opening remarks by highlighting the good. The statisticians and statistical agencies and all these other people who've been supporting this amazing effort, the epidemiologists, the economists, all over the world, have been working incredibly hard under incredibly difficult circumstances, scrambling to get answers to the questions that everybody had. So what's happening to the economy? Who's most at risk? Who's losing their job? Are people struggling? What is this virus? Where is it? How is it transmitted? Who is most at risk? How do we test the efficacy of treatments? How do we prove the safety of vaccines? These are life or death questions, so important. What most people don't appreciate is that statisticians are doing this all the time. Maybe with not such high stakes, maybe with not such attention, maybe they're not having to work so hard, but they're doing this all the time. They're trying to help us understand the world around us, show us things we can't see in any other way. And mostly, we just take it for granted. We assume the data will always be there. Statistics just come from the internet, right? We just download them from some cloud. And one thing I hope that we as the nerd community are able to emphasize when this is all over is how important the work of statisticians is. It shouldn't be something we only notice when things go wrong. It shouldn't be something we take for granted. It's vital, and I, for one, am grateful.
Well, thank you, Tim. I think it's well illustrated in your recent book, where you're giving some good guidance on how to deal with statistics and numbers. But this is a nice segue to my next question, where I will ask our producer of statistics how they dealt with these huge challenge of collecting, compiling data in circumstances that were extraordinary. And maybe I start with Susanna, who already gave us a flavor of that in the previous session.
Thank you for the very interesting question. And I'd like to make one point, which is, NSOs, they are conservative by nature. They're conservative in their organizational design, and that makes sense. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there's a sequence to how things are done. You start one phase, you finish, you start another phase, you finish, and so on. What the pandemic has done is that it has turned that on its head. And what I mean by that is that NSOs have been forced to act, in the Brazilian case, in a simultaneous manner. We have not had the time to go through each phase. These phases have to happen in synergy. And this means breaking silos. It means beyond breaking silos, it also contemplates anticipating problems almost on a daily basis. And so I think this shift from a more Fordist model to a more simultaneous model has been really the toughest and most significant challenge.
Thank you. Ola, what is your experience in terms of the big challenges of adapting the traditional model to the present time statistics?
For me, I feel, that, COVID-19 pandemic was an added value for our work, actually. It opened so many aspects which wasn't opened and which couldn't be opened without such kind of crisis. But I want to talk about two perspectives from our challenging perspective. One on the technical and data production. It's actually, I may say, we were very much, innovative and creative in developing and the data production and in the new ways. Especially when you talk about global crisis. So you're not, talking about yourself alone. And this is how we were able to learn very much quickly and get the best practices around the world very quickly. But the problem that we faced in the technical perspective is that, the development of our new data collection didn't come in parallel with the development that we have in the IT infrastructure. So the challenge was that we didn't have such a strong IT infrastructure that coped with the new era and new kind of innovative data collection that, that we wanted very much, and we were working very much hard towards that. So the challenge for us that, we were focusing on the development of data production, and we forgot that we have such an IT infrastructure that it has to be there for the development that we are actually doing. The second challenge we have actually the challenge of how we continuously monitor and stay engaged with our partners and stakeholders. And this was also very important because everyone was overwhelmed with the pandemic. So you have to take every time the initiative. So you don't wait for anyone to ask you or to request the data. So you have to be the initiator in that perspective. I may add one more challenge is actually the kind of the misuse of data. So we have reliable data that we produce in the COVID-19 pandemic, but there was kind of misuse of data in a way that I may mention that maybe someone they don't want to say the whole story. I may give an example here for the unemployment rate. The effect of the unemployment rate was very much shown during the first lockdown, because you have also to look about the labor force participation rate, which was very much reduced. So when you talk, well, we weren't very much affected. The unemployment rate wasn't really being reduced. So we were very much careful how the story can be really comprehensive, and there will be no kind of misuse of data in the way we try to communicate as much as possible in that manner. The other part, it's the I'm sorry, the admin and the management part. What I'm saying, during the lockdown, so you have a crisis. So there was, for me, a real challenge as a leader of the NSO to lead such kind of crisis, to lead such working environment, to lead the staff in the NSO during the lockdown. So, I mean, being able to really be well prepared, having a crisis management team to work along. So, I mean, that was really very much important. And the predictions that you put scenarios into perspective is also important. So it's on the technical and the management part. So how to lead also in the management perspective, such kind of crisis for the institutions that we lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Rashad.
Yeah, thank you, Louis Mark. I mean, I guess in some ways I have a bit of a split identity. I'm kind of a user, but have part responsibility for producing statistics in a central bank, but not at the level of an official statistical agency. I think that the big challenge for statistical production to some extent was really scale. I mean, I think that, and statistical systems that would have been adequate under normal circumstances, under usual troughs and usual recessions and booms and so on, those statistical systems became wholly inadequate. And I'll give you one or two examples as to how that was the case. Many countries rely on business registers for their frames against which they draw samples. Some of the most advanced statistical agencies refresh these frames quarterly. But majority of developing countries who have these business registers refresh frames once a year. Under normal circumstances, what happens is you create bias when there's kind of massive firm mortality and you're drawing your samples on a frame that has not captured the fact that some firms have simply kind of not exist anymore, and you're drawing your samples on a frame where you're artificially waiting on firms that exist in the system, means that what was previously never a problem, not a problem, has become a fundamental problem. That is just one example of how you need a very agile process to kind of draw your samples more frequently. To date, it may not have been a problem. Now, there may be all sorts of implications of how you do that. So at one level, I think that was the big challenge that even the financial crisis didn't throw up. I think that the other challenge is really scale. So, statistical agencies are well endowed with methodologists, and I was I logged on when Michael Levy from the BLS was talking. I was inspired by the approach of the BLS to the pandemic. But, methodologists are used to imputations, they're used to dealing with lower response rates and so on. But here, the challenge was of a totally different nature. If you're used to a 95% response rate and now you're dealing with a 60% response rate, how do you really deal with that? So I think that what it has done is, the scale of the crisis has thrown out some very serious questions about whether you as a statistician want to take the risk of presenting data fairly timely to the policymaker when you know it doesn't meet your usual standards that you feel must pass in order to render it official statistics or credible statistics. How do you present that? And what do you compromise on under these circumstances? I think that was the main challenge for statisticians. In the process, there were two kinds of statistical reports we saw. There were one that were delayed because statisticians were unhappy with low response rates and errors. And in the process, policymakers were operating in a bit of a vacuum. There were the others where statisticians said, take it, but use it at your own risk. The wide confidence intervals. Which one is better is not so clear. But that, I think, has been the major challenge for statistical agencies. Thank you.
Yes, you're raising a good point. Susanna told us that by nature, statisticians are conservative, and we always have to make a trade-off between quality and timeliness. And obviously, the crisis pushed the needle towards timeliness, and that means there's things that have to to go. I heard also that the IT infrastructure often didn't follow. Tim gave us the example of the lack of column on the spreadsheet, which may cause among the public some concern about trust in the numbers that are produced. And my question to our two users is the pandemic has exacerbated the lack of trust in official statistics or data in general, or is there it has created a context where there's more misuse of statistics, either because of lack of knowledge or because of lack of information? I'll start with Henry.
So I think among the people who really pay attention, I think there has been a slight undermining of trust. Not because of anything that statistical officers have done, but because, at least this is my impression in Britain, that the politicians have abused the statistics quite badly and often been unclear. But I think it's quite easy to overestimate the sort of fraction of the public that pays attention to the minutiae. Some people are very interested and some people are not. Among the wider public, I think the way I'd frame it is by saying that I think the amount of statistical confusion has gone up this year. So I talked earlier about cases and deaths and hospitalizations. It's also true on the economic front. So no matter how much effort you put in trying to get the precision right, if people aren't understanding what you're producing, then your impact is not going to be what you hope. And all the economic data this year has gone haywire in one way or another. So on GDP, I don't think it's been very helpful that there have been a lot of GDP figures used where the GDP change has been a quarterly change that's been annualized, creating a number that's really far too big, because the idea that a lockdown's effect would be compounded 4 times is obviously wrong. I've struggled within The Economist. I try to lay down the law on this and avoid the use of those numbers, but it keeps popping up because it's so seductive to have such a big number. On unemployment, it's really strange that in the UK and in most of Europe, you're not counted as further. In the US, you are. So these big disparities opened up. I think that's a good process. There are well-known issues, which I mean are hard to get around, to be fair, but with how to calculate inflation during the pandemic. So what I'd emphasise is that the communication challenges here are at least as large as the calculation challenges.
Thank you, Henry. Tim, anything that you want to add on the idea?
Yeah.
The messy.
I think Henry's quite right that the way that politicians have often spun these statistics hasn't helped, and it has been astonishing. I shouldn't be astonished because my book is partly about this, but it has been really remarkable to see the evolution of motivated reasoning throughout the pandemic. At first, people were just so hungry for data. Just tell us something, anything about this virus. Where is it? How dangerous is it? How much is it spreading? But as a sort of anti-lockdown movement has developed, and there are, I think, very good reasons to oppose lockdowns, but there are also some very bad reasons to oppose lockdowns. There's been a lot of misinformation emerging. So first, this idea of most of the people who die with COVID didn't die of COVID, which isn't true. There's been a lot of fussing about false positive rates in the testing. The latest thing I've seen going around is that epidemiologists have agreed that the infection fatality rate is actually only 0.3. Well, they haven't agreed that. There's one epidemiologist who keeps saying it, and it may be that low in Africa, but it's certainly nothing like that in the UK. A lot of stuff now about, most cases are asymptomatic. Well, that's misinformation too. Most cases are asymptomatic on the day of the test. That's pre-symptomatic or post-symptomatic, not asymptomatic. And it's been astonishing to see the goalposts constantly moved over and over again. And you realize you're, I think, mostly dealing with bad faith here. And that's hard to deal with as an official statistician. It's hard to deal with as a journalist. But we can try to provide the context, provide the detail to help correct misinformation. So most people don't actually want to be wrong. They're just capable of being led astray. As far as the issue of trust is concerned, then, the person I really pay attention to is a philosopher called Honora O'Neill, who has been thinking a lot about this. She gave a very well-received set of lectures for the BBC maybe 20 years ago about trust. And she says, look, we shouldn't be obsessed with getting people to trust more in abstract. People shouldn't trust in abstract. People should trust specific individuals or specific organizations to do specific things. So official statistical agencies should focus on what they want to be trusted to do and what they want to stay out of. And then you can't actually control whether people trust you or not. You can simply behave in a trustworthy fashion. And that means, of course, telling the truth. It also means being open in an intelligent way, giving people proper access to the data, allowing experts what they need to assess whether that data is accurate or not. And in particular, just presenting data in a usable way that people sort of feel is relevant to their everyday lives and is understandable. And all of that, I think, will enable these agencies to be viewed as more trustworthy. And hopefully, that's all we can do. So hopefully that'll be enough.
Could I jump in on that point?
Yes, come on in.
Yes, I think it's right to worry about the degree of misinformation that there's been this year with respect to statistics. But I think there are some sort of market forces at work that are dictating that, which are in the information age, information is abundant. And so everyone's, including journalists, are trying to find the way in which they can add value. Now, it's already been mentioned that the official statistics agencies are inherently conservative organizations. So everyone's trying to find the way in which to push the boundary in one direction or another to try and add some level of analysis that's not coming from an authoritative source. The trouble with that is it's very easy to go wrong and produce misinformation. Now, I think there's been several examples of this through the pandemic, even at respectable outlets. But I wonder if there is a slight argument for slightly less conservatism on the part of official agencies, because there is that vacuum in terms of you're leaving a vacuum into which people step who aren't, when they aren't qualified to draw inferences.
I agree, and I would love to know whether our grown-up colleagues also agree.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue to my next series of questions, which is to look into the technological change and digital revolution, which is either an opportunity or a challenge, and that can maybe in part respond to the question that Henry was posing in terms of the conservatism of statistical agencies. I think Susanna gave a very good example in her previous session, and maybe I'll ask her to start the conversation.
Thank you. I think the technological change, just 3 points. The first one is just the sheer volume of processing large amounts of data and what that kind of pressure does to your data management systems. And I think that's a challenge. It will continue to be a challenge as we go forward and as we have increasing demand for high frequency data. The second point is that the granularity of data and the disaggregation of this data, in our case, will present a tremendous challenge with the population census in 2021. So I see different questions in the chat box about how to get to more vulnerable groups and how to be able to analyze data at a more disaggregated level. And I think that poses a technological challenge, which speaks to the question. And the census next year, the next round of census, will confront this challenge head on. And part of it will involve having a strategy for a canvassing period, which we're doing right now in a flexible data collection manner. And then during the enumeration phase, also having adaptability in that collection model, relying on CATI, CAPI, and CAWI models, different data collection models, presential, remote, internet, and telephone. And in the post-enumeration phase, always also drawing on different technologies, both satellite imagery, grid technology, population density modeling. So we need to combine a way in which we can enhance supervision of data collection so that we can allow for reliable and quality data collection during this period. But beyond that, I wanted to make a last point, which is about on a more human level, the fact that we will likely be working remotely to some extent during the next few months and still have the responsibility of delivering on our production in a timely manner. And that will involve being creative, being some level of thinking on our feet and agility as we move forward. And that's somewhat hard to do in a remote work environment. So to keep a jazz-like symphony, which I think is the challenge in an analogy that Rashad talked about, of maintaining timeliness, and Henry talked about the premium of having updated information with reliability, I think is the biggest challenge going forward, both in terms of our conventional statistical production as well as our decennial census next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Ola, how did the technological change and digital revolution change your job in Palestine?
I mean, I may say it was really, as I mentioned, it was an added value. I mean, it embraced the change, and we enter to new era of modernization of statistics, and this is really very much important. It brought the importance of engagement with partners and stakeholders, the importance of the role of communication, and the new role of NSOs within the managing of information system, rather only production of data, and the importance of understanding the complementary roles of members of the national statistical system, where also partners play complementary roles to support each other, and this was also of an added value to us. The most important thing also, it brought the importance of capacity development and the importance of supporting always financially the national statistical organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Rashad, what's from your perspective as a central bank policymaker at the same time? So.
Yeah, I guess I wonder who wins the prize for being more conservative, statistical agencies or central banks. But I think that, I struggle with this question of technological change because I'm kind of not sure whether there's something very specific for statisticians that's any different from everything in life where technological change is a major challenge. I mean, in the last couple of years, for example, many statistical agencies have experimented with scanner data for CPIs. And, maybe that's the direction to go. So on the production side, by all means, we should be, adopting technology to the extent we can. But as many have learned, that sometimes it makes your life more complex and more difficult than, avoiding the technology. Many experiments with scanner data has landed up with more errors in measurement than would other been the case. Sometimes, it's really the face-to-face interaction where you can get reliable numbers, the reaction to a number. That could be obviously done virtually in some cases. So I think that, I think that obviously, central bank statistical agencies, like any statistical agency, have to adopt technology, but be very careful. I mean, part of the real challenge is because data is so easily available on the internet. One of the most difficult challenges for statistical agencies is kind of to just to declare some data official and some not. There's reams of data. Many of them don't have time series consistency, industry standard classifications, and so on. So I think I think on the user side, Henry's example is an interesting one. Never have I experienced so much of debate in South Africa about what is it that an annualized quarter-to-quarter GDP of 51% means, which was our, second quarter GDP. And I think that, there was enormous confusion of what that means. I think that statistical organizations could go a long way and many have done this, set up Twitter accounts, explain in couple of lines what an annual GDP is. Social media is obviously a very important and effective tool to communicate these things. But what's important about social media is you've got to be brief. You need 3 or 4 sentences. And I think that's the hard part, is that technological change from the user side puts an additional burden on statisticians to think economy of thought, say what you want to say. Previously, you would have had 3 pages to do it, say it in 4 lines. I think those are the kind of challenges that it kind of throws up. Thank you.
Well, that's a huge challenge for statistical offices in central bank if they have to educate on what Siri you should be using. But that's a valid question. In fact, many of you have said that there's a lot of data out there, and the question is to ensure that they're trustworthy. If you had 3 recommendations to give to statisticians around the world so that we promote what you've been saying, the value and the trust of statistics in general, what would it be? And I'll start with Tim.
I think Rashad's idea is fantastic. One of the things that is hard, I think, both for members of the public and for generalist journalists trying to report on statistical stories, is that it's often shorn of all context. We just don't really know what lies behind the numbers. We don't really know how they were gathered. We don't know is it based on a sample? Is there a margin of error? Is there some other source of error? Is there some definition that I should be aware of? And from the point of view of the data journalists, I'm sure what they want is all to do with kind of accessibility, standardization of formats, machine readable stuff, all of that. That's not the kind of journalist I am. I just want to be able to go to the website of the Office for National Statistics or another statistical agency. I want to find what I'm looking for quickly, and I want context with it. I want somebody to say, this is what we're doing. This is why this number may not mean what you think it means. This is the data over time. This is compared to sources in other relevant countries. And yeah, a 2-minute YouTube video, a 2-page PDF with frequently asked questions, even some tweets could be enormously helpful. And I think I understand when statisticians are thinking, look, we're working very hard, we're trying to get the numbers right. It's somebody else's job to then process or communicate. We're just trying to get the numbers right. But very often, the person who gets the numbers right in the first place is also the person who knows what he or she needs to do to explain those numbers. And that context is vital. One of several of the rules in my book, my book has rules for making sense of statistics. And so many of them are not technical rules. They are about what's happening over time, what happened last year, what's happening somewhere else, what's the context, and what is the definition? How did this data set come into being, and what does it mean? And it is astonishing how difficult it is sometimes to find that apparently quite simple information.
Thank you, Tim. Maybe I ask Susanna, who just went through a major rehaul of the production system, and she mentioned in the previous session that communication was all about communication.
Yes, thank you, Limak. And I just wanted to start. I have 3 points to the question, but I wanted to start with the points that Tim mentioned, and perhaps invite Tim to come to Brazil virtually. What we've done is interesting because it speaks to what you just raised. Basically, we have the traditional style of communication with our bulletins and releases, but we've also coupled and expanded with the 2-pager Q&A that you mentioned, that is targeted to a different audience that needs to understand that very quickly. And like you said, doesn't have the time to go through the methodology in more detail. We also coupled that with another style of communication, which is press releases in virtual town halls with the press, more generally, and experts. So the remote and the virtual environment allowed us to expand that fora and include other people. And during these sessions, which are sometimes 2.5 to 3 hours long, we're able to have discussions with journalists and other stakeholders to explain information in more detail. So I think the first point is about accessibility more broadly and using different styles of communication. The second point, quickly, is on the prioritization of efforts. I think that getting the basics right and not going into boutique efforts is of tremendous importance in the context of a pandemic and in countries that are fiscally constrained. And the third point is one that has been raised before, which is the timeliness of information, the premium on having updated statistics, like Henry said. And I'd like to go further and say the premium of real-time analysis, of having websites that are able to act as hubs and are interactive with the population with real-time data. Thank you.
You're muted, Limak.
Sorry, I was muted. Hola. What would be your 3 recommendations for statistician, and how you dealt with the communication aspect that has been raised by all the other speakers?
Well, I mean, I listened very carefully to Tim and Susanna. I fully agree with them on the importance of effective and creative communication. I may say that we worked so much on the data animation, data visualization, story maps, within different kind of platforms. I may say that also we did actually a play. So different means for different target groups is very much important. So I fully agree on the importance and the recommendation to have an effective and creative communication, and that the data has to be very much designed and communicated in a very friendly and visualized matter to best reach the audience. So, I mean, and this is really very much important, how we can also, learn more on so many tools that we can actually have. We have very much using also the social media, especially here in Palestine. More half of the population is heavily using, for example, Facebook. So we are investing very much in promoting the data through Facebook, for example, where most of our population are using such kind of social media. So this is really important, and I feel very much that, I mean, effective and creative communication is so much important, and I highly recommend our statisticians around the world to promote the value in that perspective. The second recommendation I also would like to add regarding the importance of embracing the modernization of statistics and embracing the change and enter the era of modernization through data interoperability and data stewardship. So it's not only limited to our, to the traditional official statistics, where I very much, respect the importance of staying to the fundamental principles of official statistics. But now, coming to a new era of modernization of statistics, coming to the data modernization, coming to the data interoperability and data stewardship is so much important to come and to make sure that we are reaching, the priorities of our users. And I may add the importance of investing in the new technologies to come up and to align with the data production and the continuous process of the capacity development of the staff of the national statistical organizations and also the rest of the players in the national statistical system and the national information statistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Rashad, I don't want to exacerbate your double personality, but you as a policymaker, what would be your recommendation for a statistician in the context that we have been discussing this morning?
Yeah, look, my first recommendation to statisticians is this: in this era of budget cuts, fight hard to preserve your budget because everyone's kind of suffering budget cuts. I think that one of the most important things, people like Henry and Tim are really important, having read their work, are really important ambassadors to the statistical community. And part of it is because, they think about a lot as journalists, as analysts, about how you're communicating about statistics. Often the problem with statisticians is that, we're so involved in the kind of producer side, getting it all together, that we cut ourselves short when it comes to kind of explaining what do we really mean. And I think it all boils down to ask the question, to look at the value of statistics, you could ask the question, what really is the comparative advantage of the official statistician? And the comparative advantage of the official statistician is that she or he understands the complex process by which the number was brought together. She or he understands the limitations, the caveats, the conditions in which you use the number, and so on. And I think there's a big onus in educating the most specialists who are interested in thousands of years of quarterly time series numbers to the person in the street. What does this number mean? How did you compile it? How did you bring it all together? I mean, one interesting thing is, we heard from Michael Levy that, you have to substitute household interactions with telephones and so on. Very important. Say to us, what did we lose? What did we lose by not interacting in person? What kind of biases could emerge in the financial in the kind of labor statistics? Similarly, maybe under this period, national accounts numbers show a higher residual. It would be very important to communicate what does that higher residual mean in a way that we have not done before. So I think that crisis puts the burden on the statistician to really explain what's going on. In the best of times, it's an imperfect world, but it's particularly bad now, and there's a real challenge to explain. It goes for seasonal adjustment. What do you do with kind of seasonal adjustment, which is not normal now? You can have all sorts of tricky complications. Explain to the user what all this means. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. We have heard a lot about communication, the needs for data. Henry, do you think as a user that you're getting the right statistics, and what is missing? And what would be your 3 recommendations for statistician to help you do your job?
It's certainly the case that data is a lot more abundant nowadays, as we've been discussing. But related to that, I would welcome a bit more adjudication from experts as to what the good series are and which are not to be used or more experimental. And I always feel it's helpful when things are ranked in that way. When I was covering the US economy, the most important number for the time I was there was wage growth. But there were, I think, 3 different series for wage growth, and you could understand why there was a reason behind each one. But it made it very, very difficult when my editors came to me and said, Henry, how much are wages going in America? And if an official body had been willing to compile them into one sort of master index that everyone could work, or the layman could work off, it would make my job easier. Otherwise, I become the adjudicator of that debate, which is not always the position you want to be in. So that's one thing. I think in a world of abundance, sometimes there's an argument for less is more and quality over quantity, or at least for adjudicating quality. The second thing, and this might seem small, but I think the phrase statistically significant is to be avoided at all costs in the public domain. It's the worst type of jargon in that it means a different thing to most people to what it means to statisticians. And you'd be surprised how often this crops up when reporting statistical research. You know, the public thinks significant means something about magnitude, not about the confidence in the effect not being 0. So my second thing is I would ban that phrase. And the final thing, I know a lot of people have said this, but I would return to the ease of presentation, and I would point to one service which I think is really, really good, and that's the FRED, Federal Reserve Economic Data service that one of the regional feds puts out. It really is amazingly high quality. It's very easily searchable, and it's not just that you can pull standardized data from there if you want to do big data stuff. It's just the accessibility of the data's very good, and I think everyone who follows the US economy, well, not everyone, but a large number of people go to FRED first rather than to primary sources, and that really does illustrate the value that kind of service can provide.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you all. I think this was a great debate. Now I'll turn now to the audience that may have some questions, and I have 2 of them here. The first one is, what are the strategy health ministry are putting in place to reduce contagious COVID-19? And for Susanna and Ola, to understand who is more affected by the virus and more vulnerable to corresponding mitigation measure, can you talk a bit about the collection challenge of disaggregated COVID-19 pandemic data? So Susanna, let's start with that one, and then I'll go back to the first one for all of you.
Thank you. These are very significant questions. The first one, in terms of the health ministry, I'll speak to the technical part that relates to our National Statistical Office. And we've worked closely with the National Health Ministry on our pulse survey, which is a combination of labor market outcomes with health outcomes. And so together we worked on, beyond the health ministry, we also involved a series of other partners, national and international partners, to talk about the questionnaire and sampling strategies. And in less than 2 months, we got the survey up and running, with contemplating a series of themes, from lockdown experiences to the prevalence of symptoms, to testing strategies. And what has been interesting is that over the course of time, we've been able to add additional questions so that we could get to a more disaggregated cross-sections of the population to do this data analysis. The second question, which concerns also the granularity of data, we will be able to address more fully next year with our decennial population census, which is the only data collection operation in the country that actually goes to 70 million households. So at that point, we will be able to have an instrument to draw inference and analysis on the most disaggregated level possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Ola.
Thank you. As for the Ministry of Health, we started with them really very well. We have developed actually a platform for the COVID-19 pandemic, and things were really working very much well. I may say that we were planning to do actually the impact of COVID-19 on health aspects, but I mean, it seems that we have an issue of, and this is one of the challenges, it's actually the overwhelm of the Ministry of Health in dealing with the crisis. Also, it does affect the kind of communication that we started really with them really very well. As for the second question, so it's good that it still need kind of progress when we talk about the strategy work with the health of ministry. The other issue that we worked also with them on the Ministry of Health actually, and on actually mixed health survey. And this will where we are going actually to publish the data by the end of this month. And I hope that we will be able to develop the work and to conduct this survey during, if not by the end of this year, by the beginning of next year. The second question is related, actually, if I understood well, because I had some kind of interruption while you were asking the question. So if it was about what we actually still we are working with our stakeholders and partners, if I understood well, is that correct, Louis?
Yeah, it's about to understand the effect of virus and the more vulnerable to corresponding mitigation measure. Can you talk a bit about the collection challenges of disaggregated data? So it's about disaggregated data and maybe in partnership with the
I may say that we already conducted 2 surveys. One, it's the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the households, and another one on the establishments. And we covered actually all perspectives from education, social, everything on the households. And education was very much affected. The good thing that, I mean, we conducted the data, this kind of 2 surveys, and we were able to disaggregate it per sector and disaggregated also per age category. So it was really very much important that to see the impact of COVID-19 on the children in education, on the health access during the lockdown. So we have really so many interesting results that we hope that we were able to support the policymakers in these 2 surveys. We are planning on the establishment survey to have it, I mean, on regular basis. So we did the first round and we got the results. We actually published the results in cooperation with the Ministry of Economy and Trade. And we are now preparing for the second round, taking into consideration, because we did the first one with a huge sample size to get the disaggregation level. And based on the, on the effect of COVID-19 pandemic, we are actually preparing the second round. So it's kind of really lessons how we can move on with the work. But at least, I mean, these are the 2 core issues that we have conducted, and we have such a great disaggregated data. The issue is actually how we can develop such kind of a real platform that this all such rich disaggregated data that can be very much easy accessed by all policymakers, and not also by all policymakers, by anyone who are actually interested in data. And then we come also to communication, how we can provide such data in a very good, friendly, easy manner that everyone can understand it. Thank you.
Thank you all. Very good work. I will have another question from the panel, from the participant. We all agree, the panel has all agreed that statistics is key for decision making. And We have identified challenges with bias in the data or lack of metadata. So once all those bias in statistics are quantified and understood, what do you think the reaction would be from decision maker, and were they already decision made on that bias data, what would happen? So we'll start with Rashad.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Look, I think that the important thing is that it kind of depends on the policy. In the kind of work that that I'm involved in as a central banker, you have your multi-policy committee meetings every second month. The data improves. You kind of review. You're able to kind of correct your decision if the data, if the biases are tangible or not. I think one of the problems, if you're uncertain about the data, it kind of results in a bit of policy inertia. So you find that that it's very hard to make real decisions if you don't know what exactly your evidence base is. But I think this is where it's not only about official data, it's about complementary data, it's relying on investigative data. So I think that at the end of the day, decisions are made on a number of sources. In South Africa, for example, we have a very developed social grants system. We didn't need to collect data. We have all these households who are on social grants. We added, some supplements to the social grants under COVID-19. I think the only time, you'll really find and you look back what you do wrong and so on. But I think generally it doesn't become a deterrent. It helps you to devise policy in such a way that once you pick up some biases, you can make changes where it's necessary. When you're kind of not sure of the data, some of your policy actions are a bit tentative, allowing for the fact that you may have to kind of change your path later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. Tim, do you think that policymakers care about biases?
I think it depends very much on the policymaker. I mean, we've seen an extraordinary range of reactions from some policymakers who are very keen to spread disinformation with every tweet, and other policymakers who I think are very, very keen to really get into the detail and really understand what's been going on. My general instinct, and I understand I'm no expert on this sort of risk communication, but my general instinct is that if you treat people like grown-ups, you explain to them clearly what you know and also what you don't know, people tend to value that. It leaves you vulnerable, of course. Confessions of bias or confessions that there's some problem with the data set can be used as a weapon against the evidence. But that's always been true, and that seems to be true even when the evidence is excellent. So I think I would tend to err on the side of giving people, treating people like grown-ups, treating people with respect, and being very clear about what you know, but also about what you don't know.
Thank you, Tim. Henry, you heard that the statisticians are paying a lot of attention to try to have the right sample, have their bias explained, their metadata. For you to do your job, what would they have to do more?
So the way I see it is that task, the questioner referred to of constantly searching for problems in the data and correcting the bias is an ongoing one. More is always better, but I'm feeling quite greedy there because I know that a lot of effort goes in all the time to improving statistics. But I would take take some issue with the idea that that's a task that can never be completed, that you can never fully sort of understand everything that's possibly wrong with data. Data is always going to be a limited, partial snapshot of the world. And I do think there's been a slightly unfortunate tendency this year to sort of mesh together a little bit the idea of scientific observation with political decision making. And they are different, And I think even if you are dealing with really, really high quality data, it's not the case that data is ever going to tell you what you should do. It will only paint a picture. So higher quality is better, yes. But I would imagine, and like Tim, I'm not an expert on the weeds of producing data like the rest of the panel, but I would imagine that's always an ongoing thing. And the higher the quality of the data, the better the decisions. But there's not a strict link from one to the other.
Thank you, Henry. There's another question from the floor. One of the big challenges is how to spread new technology and methodology to low-income countries. Can you elaborate on how dissemination of innovation could be achieved more effectively? Maybe we heard about partnership from Ola and Susanna. So Ola. I think we lost Ola. Susanna.
Yes, I thank you for that question. It's a very important question at this stage, and it was critical in our case. And I have 2 points to make. The first one is the importance of agility in technical assistance from multilateral organizations. I cannot emphasize how important this was in our case. And what I mean by that is a week matters. When you're in the middle of a crisis, like the one we faced, a week delay matters. Institutions like the IDB and like the IMF were able to be agile enough to come to our assistance and work with our teams in critical moments. So that agility, that ability to adapt, that ability to think rapidly with existing instruments of technical assistance was fundamental in the last 8 months. The second point is that compliers and international organizations more broadly help developing countries in a sense of coming to those countries with a problem-driven approach. And what do I mean by that? I mean coming to this interaction and to this fora with an open mind to work with the country to find what are the existing bottlenecks to statistical production. And thinking about what those bottlenecks are, thinking about which ones are likely to have more positive spillovers in terms of the organization as a whole and in terms of other low and middle income countries. And this is an approach that is done in tandem with the country, as opposed to the organization coming in with a preconceived agenda of what the country should do based on funding linkages and other development agendas that are predetermined. So working with the country to find out what are those bottlenecks, especially in the context of a pandemic, in the context of urgency that we found ourselves, was critical. And the IDB and the IMF stepped up to the plate. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Rashad, from the perspective of a central banker.
To be honest, Louis, Mark, I don't have much to add to that question. I think that we have. You're talking about the question around developing capacity. Sorry, which question are you referring to?
I'm referring to the transfer of technology and innovation from one institution to another, or one country to another.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that as you know, that because developing countries are kind of late starters in technology, they sometimes kind of well ahead of many developed countries. But I think international conferences, meeting with peers, seeing what other central banks do, seeing what other statistical agents do, that's a really important basis on which kind of diffusion takes place. It kind of starts off with ideas, and it then moves to kind of execution of real changes in many of these countries. So I think that it's not the case that less endowed, less wealthier countries are laggards. They're actually often at the frontier of many of technology. So, for example, because many countries didn't have established fixed line telephony, they started off, mobile technology with a vengeance, and kind of surpassed many other countries in the, whether it's kind of the use of statistics or the payment system and so on. So I think that it's a kind of more complex world we live in from that point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. Thank you all. I think there's still a lot of question in the chat and a lot of praise for your comments and your contribution. I would like to end this session by having a short survey. My team has prepared a short survey for you, participant, to give your view. I think we're going to have the instruction on the screen. Yes, so you have to go to menti.com and enter the code 250747 and then answer the question. And we should have the response immediately. This is about timeliness, not necessarily about unbiased data, although the participants are totally unbiased. So it seems that participants are agreeing with the panel: timeliness, data collection, communication, accuracy, new data source. It doesn't seem to be changing at all. Timeliness, accuracy, communication, data collection seems to be the view of our participant. Did we have another question, or was that the only question? Oh, here. So it seems that producer of statistics needs to work a bit harder because we need different data. Well, it seems that we need different data, which is some of the conclusion that we had during our panel. Okay. Well, it seems that our participants are agreeing with the panel. Communication, transparency, accuracy, and access seems to be the message that they're carrying to us. Well, with that, I hope that I would like to thank this fantastic panel for this rich and diverse conversation. I think we learn a lot. I know that conversation is not over. There's a lot to be said again. I would like to thank you for taking the time off your very busy schedule for participating. I hope you enjoy the panel as much as I did. I think the richness of the conversation was extraordinary, and I wish you all to be safe and healthy, and hopefully we meet again physically in maybe a year. Take care. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Henry.